Now we're going to talk about the Baltimore Ravens. They're going to have the same coaching staff, even though Dave Culley left. John Harbaugh, Don Martindale, Greg Roman, all guys who are basically the building blocks for whatever the Ravens are trying to build. They have $19 million in cap space, and they have no bad contracts. They could save cap if they were to cut Brandon Williams, but he's a really good player. I think they just restructure his contract, worst case scenario. They have 27 pending free agents. These are the most notable ones: Matt Judon, Yannick Ngakoue, Willie Snead, Mark Ingram, Derek Wolfe, Matt Skura, Pernell McPhee, DJ Fluker, and Gus Edwards. I think Matt Judon goes. Yannick Ngakoue goes. Willie Snead, he can go or stay. I'm not sure what they're going to do. Mark Ingram goes because of J.K. Dobbins. Derek Wolfe probably goes. Matt Skura, they have a better center than Makari now, so I think he might go. Pernell McPhee, I'm not sure if he's going to retire or go, but I think he goes too. DJ Fluker, maybe sign him back for depth, and Gus Edwards, at a reasonable price, you sign him back. But all in all, I don't think there are a lot of must-keep guys. Maybe Yannick Ngakoue, just because they traded something for him. And, I mean, just after one season, if they don't bring him back, it's going to look pretty bad. But if he gets a huge payday, he hasn't really shown anything to really warrant him coming back.
Yeah, I was going to say, out of all of those guys, the two names that I would think about are Judon or Ngakoue, just because I think losing both of them might hurt a little bit. And Ngakoue, you gave up capital for, so he would make the most sense to bring back. But, like you mentioned, there will probably be a team overpaying for him. So are the Ravens willing to get in a bidding war over him? I don't know. But when you look at a bunch of these free agents, I don't think many of them make sense. You mentioned Gus Edwards. I think with Mark Ingram essentially having a foot out the door, he posted pretty much a goodbye on Instagram the other day saying, I can't wait for my next opportunity. He did great things there, but now with J.K. Dobbins in there, keeping Gus Edwards, I think, would be a good spell back for Dobbins, but Dobbins can be a 3-down back. There's no question about it. He showed it at the end of the season. And I don't think there's much else that they have to keep around. Derek Wolfe, he's getting older, and I think he's going to get a bigger contract than the Ravens are willing to give out to him. Skura struggled at the end of the season, and so I think they'll move on from him, and they'll have money to spend that they can improve that position, especially potentially losing Orlando Brown. I think they'll splurge to improve that offensive line.
Yeah, for me, they have three major positions of need: wide receiver, guard, and a slot cornerback. At wide receiver, we know the major big-name receivers: Allen Robinson, T.Y. Hilton, Kenny Golladay, Sammy Watkins, A.J. Green, Corey Davis, Juju, Marvin Jones, Kendrick Bourne, Chris Conley, Rashard Higgins, Tim Patrick, an underrated guy, and Zach Pascal. At guard, you have Austin Blythe, John Feliciano, Brian Winters, Kelechi Osemele. At the slot cornerback position, Mike Hilton, Cameron Sutton, K'Wan Williams, and Troy Hill. And we talked about this potential trade earlier on in the show, but Orlando Brown for Mike Williams and some draft capital. In my opinion, the trade on paper makes sense, but from the Ravens side of things, I wouldn't do this trade just because Mike Williams has an injury history. You're not really sure if he can be a bona fide number one, and Lamar Jackson needs a bona fide number one, plus you're losing a tackle, and how are you going to fill that position? So for me, I think that they keep Orlando Brown, and in the draft, they target a guard or they target an edge rusher. In my opinion, they're going to go and target a guard, Gregory Roche, Jalen Phillips, or Kwity Paye. I think at where they're picking at the 27th pick, Kwity Paye will be there. This is my offense and defense for the Ravens team. Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins. I think they sign Allen Robinson. They get Marquise Brown, Devin Duvernay's the slot, Mark Andrews, Nick Boyle, Ronnie Stanley, Bradley Bozeman, Patrick McCarry. They sign Kelechi Osemele. They get Orlando Brown Jr. stays. In my opinion, like Ronnie Stanley's probably going to be injured for the start of the season, so Orlando Brown will continue to play left tackle. And if Ronnie Stanley comes back, I'd move Ronnie Stanley to right tackle.
Is he willing?
You never know.
I haven't heard anything about his opinion on the situation.
Yeah, nobody really knows, but I think Ronnie Stanley would probably do what's best for the team, and he'd probably just slide to right tackle. I don't think it's that big of a deal. He did just get a massive contract. So it's really not that big of a deal. On defense, they draft Kwity Paye, keep Brandon Williams. They still have Calais Campbell at the 2 inside linebacker spots, Patrick Queen and LJ Ford. I think they keep Matt Hudon for the right price. You never know what's going to happen. But then at cornerback, they don't really need to do much. Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Jimmy Smith, Chuck Clark, and Deshaun Elliott. I mean, this team is just missing a number 1 wide receiver. And by getting Allen Robinson, whatever you have to pay, you get him in the building because he's really going to open up this entire Ravens offense. That's all they need.
Yeah, and I would say if they lose Orlando Brown, and that's not a contract you have to worry about, I would also look into splurging on the offensive line. A guy like Corey Linsley from the Packers is a guy I think would be a good fit. You know, they had trouble with that offensive line in the playoffs last year. It was one of the things that ended up hurting them when they eventually lost. But if they could keep Orlando Brown, I don't think the offensive line needs too much work with Ronnie Stanley coming back. Obviously, when they were healthy last year, that offensive line was pretty strong. So it just depends on the health of that group and everybody coming back. But I'll operate under the assumption they get Orlando Brown to buy in. It's receiver. And anybody could tell you this. Obviously, Allen Robinson is the guy. Who wouldn't want to go play with Lamar Jackson, be the guy to help him take that step? I've been pretty down on Marquise Brown, but if you could get Marquise Brown in the 2 spot, it's a totally different story. And I think he would really improve as a player in that number 2 role rather than being a number 1. So the only problem is beyond Allen Robinson. I don't know how good the fit is with a couple of the other top guys. Like, I don't know if Chris Godwin or Kenny Golladay end up there. So then you have to start getting a little Will Fuller as a guy that I've heard talked about with them. Maybe a good fit with Lamar Jackson. But Allen Robinson should be the guy they're focused on. He could be the game breaker for them and the one to put them over the top and make them a true contender.
And Kelechi Osemele played for the Ravens. He was drafted by the Baltimore Ravens, so it'd be a reunion with him coming back. I mean, you mentioned it all. Maybe they could go and get a slot cornerback like K'Wan Williams. He might not be too expensive, or a Troy Hill, who's 30 years old, undrafted cornerback. He had a good season with the LA Rams, but who knows if he's going to get a big payday. I mean, there are a lot of potential guys. Maybe you go the route of getting Mike Williams and getting a 2nd and 4th rounder along with him and addressing in the 1st round the tackle position, then in the 2nd and 4th round going edge rusher and cornerback. There are a lot of different scenarios, but I think we can all agree the position they need to get is wide receiver.
Yeah.
Getting Lamar Jackson help, whether it's Allen Robinson or Kenny Golladay or a guy like Sammy Watkins or Corey Davis, Marvin Jones, whoever it is, they just need to bring in a guy that can help that offense and open it up because it's a very predictable offense. And who knows if that's just Greg Roman sticking to what he knows and sticking to his guns, or the Ravens just not having enough receivers for Greg Roman to open up the playbook more. There are a lot of different factors that factor into that.
And that's one of the conversations we had this year, is it just Greg Roman being too set in his system? We'll see if they end up bringing in the guy. Do you think, you mentioned slot corner, do you think Brian Poole would be too expensive for them? I know he had a bit of a down year statistically, so
yeah,
potentially an option.
If they sign a wide receiver number 1 like Allen Robinson or Kenny Golladay, they're going to have to pay them about $10 to $16 million per year. If you do that, you can't really spend anywhere else unless you restructure some contracts. And even in that, you won't have too much money. So I don't think Brian Poole is very realistic, or any top player. If you're getting a top guy in wide receiver in free agency, I don't think any other scenario really fits.
Yeah, and there are a couple of good options in free agency too, in the draft at positions they need. Wide receiver, I love Rashad Bateman, and if he's there towards the end of the 1st round, I think even if you bring in one of those top wide receivers, it wouldn't be that bad of an idea. You're looking at an Allen Robinson, Marquise Brown, Rashad Bateman core. That could lead to one of the better wide receiving cores in the league in the next couple of years. So surrounding Lamar Jackson with those weapons, guys who are able to get open, that was one of the biggest problems this year, is there was no separation created. So maybe bringing in one of those end of the 1st round wide receivers, also guards. If you wanted to beef up the offensive line, if you do go get a number 1 wide receiver, you could look at a guy like Wyatt Davis, a guy like Alex Leatherwood that we talked about, Elijah Vera Tucker. So there will be options for them at that 1st round pick that they can fill in at a cheaper option depending on where they go in free agency, which I think should be wide receiver.